So, Theodore Trefon, you are the director of the contemporary section of the Africa Museum in Tervuren. You are teaching at Boston University. You're also a member of the academic board of CERIS, and you recently published Congo Masquerade. Related to this, I would like to ask you a few questions. And the first one is the following. The size of Kinshasa is equivalent to the size of whole Belgium. But on the contrary, the size of the budget of the Congolese state is equivalent to the budget of a small city like Antwerp. So by the end of the day, do elections matter in such a context?
Do elections matter? The elections that we've just had in November of 2011 were an important landmark for the Congolese people and for all of those people that have invested in bringing about positive change in the Democratic Republic of Congo. But we have to look back to the elections of 2005 to give a little bit of perspective. In 2005, Joseph Kabila was elected president, and there was parliamentary elections at the same time. Now, the elections brought a relatively inexperienced lot of politicians to power, which means that Kabila, who was 30 years old when he was parachuted into the presidency when his father was assassinated 5 years before that, had very little political experience. The vast majority of the Congolese parliamentarians had very little political experience. So this means that the dysfunction of government goes back to this lack of professionalism and lack of political experience. Now, do elections matter? Certainly they do. Elections are an important process in the democratization of any country. But I would argue that they're also masquerade, because what happened now, just as in 2005, there were supposed to be 3 series of elections: presidential, parliamentary, and local. Now, in 2005, local elections did not take place. So that means that in 2011, we've reproduced the same type of mistake. Instead of creating a system whereby people would be able to associate and appropriate governance, they've really been largely excluded from the political debate, because the real way to bring about trust between government and people is by having politics at the local level. Well, this just hasn't happened. And so it was a mistake to go into a second phase of elections without finishing the first round. If you don't give people the chance to vote for their local representatives, they're not going to appreciate power. The Kinshasa government is distant. It's perceived as being corrupt. It's perceived as being ineffective. And this is true. Now, what is the link between someone living in the Maniema province and Kinshasa? Someone living in the remote forests of Equateur. There's very, very little connection between government and ordinary people. And so the elections, they do matter, but it was a mistake not to have had the local level.
The international community has invested a lot in Congo during the last 10 years. Can we now argue that Congo is likely to recover in the coming years?
Congo is on the move. Congo has come from far in the past 10 years. The international community has invested heavily. They've invested a lot of money, diplomatic positioning, human resources. A lot of the world's best development experts have been involved in rebuilding what is often considered as the paradigm of a failed state. But what's tragic in this situation is that the results are very, very poor. Despite the huge investment, and just in terms of finance alone, between 2001 and 2007, there was something like $15 billion invested in the state building process. But things haven't moved ahead, because when we look at the security sector, there is not very much more security today than there was at the time when the MONUC, now MONUSCO, went into Congo. And the budget of MONUSCO today is over $1.5 billion annually. So that's a lot of money for security. So the Congolese authorities will say now that 9 of the 11 provinces are safe, but that means that 2 of the provinces, 2 of the most highly populated provinces, the 2 Kivus, are still constantly in a state of insecurity. A very high UN official described Congo as being the rape capital of the world. This is because of the insecurity in the Congo, in the eastern provinces. So when we look at the evaluation, yes, okay, some security has come, but not enough. When you look at justice, that was another big point on the development agenda. Congolese often say today, why pay for a lawyer when I can buy a judge? So the legal system, the justice system, hasn't moved forward. Poverty, that was also one of the major tasks that the international community had tried to adopt and bring about change in the past 10 years. The 2012 report on human development puts Congo at the very bottom of the list, not near the bottom, in the last position. That means that the Congolese people are amongst the poorest in the world. And we're not talking about a small country without resources. We're talking about a country that's nearly the size of Western Europe, approximately 70 million people, with minerals, with oil, with hydroelectric power, with agricultural potential. It's unacceptable that the Congolese people should be so poor. We can understand that some other countries, like Niger or Burkina Faso, with no resources, would be very low on the Human Development Index. But a country like Congo, this proves that there really is a social tragedy going on. Now, I don't necessarily subscribe to the theories of conspiracy about and against Congo. But when we look at 51 years of independence, what can we observe? 51 years of the development of underdevelopment. 51 years of maintaining the country in a position of dependency. 51 years of corrupt regime. So, yes, when we look at what's been going on in the past few years, there's relatively little hope to imagine that positive change is going to come from this big international investment strategy or from the Congolese government. Now, while a lot of partners are involved in Congo, a big paradox is associated to the fact that there's no master plan. The World Bank strategy doesn't necessarily correspond to European Union policy, or what DFID is doing doesn't necessarily correspond to what Belgian policy is. So in the absence of a master plan, there's an inflation of lots of different actors carrying out fragmented and often contradictory policies. Now, just a comment on competition. International partners are competing one against the other. We had the perfect example of that was the events in the end of 2010 when China signed a major investment deal with Congo that was blocked by the World Bank. It went down from $9 billion to $6 billion because the bank was afraid that the type of development that China was bringing into Congo would recreate a spiral of indebtedness. So that's one example of competition between international partners. There's obviously competition between international partners and the Congolese themselves, because many of these strategies for state building are designed in Paris, Washington, London, Brussels, without really taking into account what the Congolese expect from this type of development. So, obviously, if you're not involved in the design or the elaboration of a plan, it's very hard to get your partners to appropriate the strategy. This is something that's the second level of competition. And then, obviously, there's the third level, which is competition between the Congolese themselves. Congolese political establishment is also very fragmented. There's a strong opposition. People don't get along. Just one example in recent politics is the aborted policy of decentralization. The 2005 Constitution established decentralization in Congo. There was going to be a transfer of authority and a recomposition of the administrative map from 11 provinces to 26. That's become a dead letter because 2 provinces in Congo control 80% of the country's wealth. So obviously the richer provinces don't want to pay for the poorer ones. And again, international partners also had a role in this because while the World Bank claims to have some idea of what's going on at the Kinshasa level, they have absolutely no idea what's going on at the provincial level. So they didn't want decentralization to go through. And this also relates to the fact that data collection and data management in Congo is a major challenge. Data management has basically fallen off the radar screen. So who really knows what's going on? Another comment just about the absence of data. First of all, we don't even know how many Congolese there actually are. The number 70 million is an estimate. The last census report was done in 1984. 1984. So how can you even register voters if you don't know what the population is? We don't know what the population is. Second thing, civil service. We have no idea how many people actually work for the government. And a lot of people in power want to maintain that ambiguity because of what we refer to as ghost workers. That happens in the administration and in the military, where superiors claim salaries for people that don't exist, that are dead, that have retired. So we don't know how many civil servants there are. There are lots of examples when we're giving numbers about Congo, but no one really knows. The budget. The state budget is approximately $7 billion US. That's a very, very small amount. It's larger than the budget of a mid-sized American university, but not much more. The whole budget of Congo is often compared to the budget of the city of Antwerp in Belgium. So it's a very, very small budget. Where is all the revenue coming from the mining sector going? Where is the money that is generated by the forestry sector going?
Congo is considered as a paradigm of failed state. Is it also a failed society?
Congo is definitely a failed state because the government can't control its borders. It has no idea even how many people there are. It has abdicated its sovereignty to international partners. It's unable to establish the strong relation of trust between people and government. So these are the criteria of being a failed state. But conversely, Congolese society is not failed. Congolese society is dynamic, it's generous, it's tolerant, it's innovative. Just a few examples of this. Congo is a country that has a very, very underdeveloped banking system. So if women, farmers, need to band together to buy seeds or fertilizers, what do? They organize a rotating credit system. If people want to buy in a small community group, say, well, it's cheaper to buy a bag of charcoal wholesale opposed to each of us buying it retail, they group together. People want to send their crops to market. They pitch in and organize the renting of a lorry to bring their goods to market. Look, paying school fees. In many cases, the government doesn't provide primary education, so parents organize to build a school and to pay the teachers. Same thing with things, even major things like bringing in water piping in electrical lines into communities that are not served by the national grid. What happens is people organize amongst themselves to bring in even heavy infrastructure. They organize themselves with some state agencies that can help, but the services are privatized. So while the state is unable to respond to the needs of the people, people have a very strong sense of taking charge of their own destinies. And they're doing this for their families, they're doing this for their communities, they're doing it through the informal economy, they're doing it in the rural areas. So while I think that Congo is certainly on the move, it's an interesting exercise to track how Congolese people themselves are taking charge of what will be the future of their children. The role of the diaspora is also very, very important. Diaspora has helped bring about some level of change and development through political mobilization, through funding, and the general concept of making linkages between diaspora populations from around the world. France, Belgium, the UK, South Africa, the US. Congolese are very active in paying attention to what's going back at home. And so they're participating in political mobilization. Now, you've asked me a few questions that I've tried to respond to, and I'd like to end by asking another rhetorical question. And that is that, well, the elections last week have shown us that there's significant access to freedom of expression in media. People are mobilized. But the real question is this: how can people really mobilize to bring about positive change at the institutional level, given the obstacles that they're confronted with? Thank you very much.